This is Rad Devin, and this week we're going to jump back into Learn New Node and do a couple more exercises. If you didn't see the last Node video, I'll post a card up here that you can click on so that you can go back and get caught up. All right, let's dig in. I have two things open right now on my computer. I have Terminal, and I am in my Learn New Node project, and then I also have Visual Studio Code, and I have it open to the Learn New Node project. Now I want to start the Learn New Node CLI. We completed the first 4 exercises last time. This time we are going to try FilteredLS. Create a file named FilteredLS.js. Create a program that prints a list of files in a given directory filtered by the extension of the files. You will be provided a directory name as the first argument to your program and a file extension to filter by as the second argument. For example, if you get txt as the second argument, then you will need to filter the list to only files that end with .txt. Note that the second argument will not come prefixed with a dot, so it'll just be the extension, the file extension. And then this is just a reminder that the first value in process.argv is not going to be the first argument. We should print the list of files to the console, 1 file per line, and we must use asynchronous I/O. I'm going to try to do this one without the hints. I may need to jump back into those later. I will start by creating a new file. FilteredLS.js, I think is the name. Yes, that looks right. I'm going to flip over to a web browser and head over to the Node.js documentation. I'm running this version, 12.16.1. I know I'm going to need the file system module. Actually, I can go ahead and just require that. First, I'm going to shrink down my sidebar. You can do that either by clicking on whichever tab is currently active. Mine's the Explorer. Or you can hit Command B on a Mac. I assume it's Control B on Windows, but I don't know that for a fact. This is how we require one of the Node built-in modules. Now flipping back over to the documentation, I know we're going to need readdir. That gives us the contents of a directory. So I'm just going to do a find for that, Command F or Control F on Windows, and that takes me straight to it. We can't use sync because part of the project spec or part of the exercise spec is that it has to use asynchronous I/O. So that would be just this vanilla fs.readdir, which means we will need to pass in a callback. That's the signature. The first argument is going to be the directory. It's process.argv, and I know that is at index 2 because 0 is going to be node, just the string node, and then index 1 is going to be the name of this script. So index 2 would actually be the first argument. The second argument is going to be the extension. That covers all the data I need to get from the user. I think the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the entire directory contents. Then I will go through that array and filter it by the extension we get from the user on the command line. I'll call this directory contents. And this is where we're going to call fsReader. It needs a path, which is going to be directory. We've already grabbed that out of process.argv, and it needs a callback. Okay, the callback is going to get an argument from reader. When reader finishes reading the directory, it's going to call the callback and pass in whatever data it wants to pass along. In our case, that's going to be the list of files. So I'm just going to call this files. The question now is, what do I want to do with files once I get it? And that's going to be what I code here into this callback function. I'm going to create another variable here. It's going to be filtered files. And this will be the same list of files, but filtered for the extension. So I'm going to do files.filter. Filter is just a JavaScript array method that we can call on any JavaScript array. The way it works is you give it a callback function that returns true for items you want to keep in the new array and returns false for items you do not want to keep. Okay, so this is another callback function. It's going to have one file name passed into it. So I'm just going to call this parameter file name. Now we need to know the test we're going to run on the file name to determine if the extension matches. I'm going to flip back over to my Node documentation because I happen to know about another module that will help us here. It is the path module. Path can take path strings and file names and do all sorts of neat and useful things with them. If you're looking through this list of methods, this one might jump out given what we're trying to do here, path.xName. What this does is it returns the extension of the path. You pass it a path, which is just a path string, and it will return to you the extension. Here are some examples of calls you might make and what they would return. The first thing we need to do if we're going to use this is we need to get the path module in here. We do that the same way as we bring in the FS module. Now I'm going to actually use it. What I want to do is I want to push my file name through that path.xName. And I think I'll just go ahead and make a variable. I could probably do all this in one line, but like I mentioned last time, I like to create intermediary steps with additional variables to sort of document what's happening. I'm going to call this one extension. And it's just going to be a call to that xName method on the path module. We're going to pass in file name, which is the name of the current file we're looking at. That'll give us the extension. Let me flip back over to those examples and see if the dot's included. It is included. That means we either need to take the dot out of what we get back here, or we need to add a dot to whatever's been passed in. I believe what I'm going to do is just add the dot onto the extension. In fact, I'm just going to do that directly in the assignment. And to do that, I'm going to use a template string. That'll make this really easy. What I can do, I want it to interpolate this value and insert it in the string. So if I preface the value with a $sign and then wrap it in these curly braces, instead of the string literally having these characters in it, it will have this value that's inside the curly braces. That only works in a template string, and a template string is delimited by these backticks. So that's just a press of the key above tab. This is not a single quote, even though it kind of looks like a single quote, maybe leaned a little bit more. But a single quote would just have this string in it literally. It would not insert the value that you want. And the only thing I want to do here is I want to put a dot. This string will be literally dot, and then whatever the value is at process.argv at the third position in that array. Now that gives us something we can compare to. The only problem is I just noticed that this variable is extension and my new variable is also extension, which is at the very least going to be confusing and probably broken. So let's change one of these. I'm going to change this one to filter extension. So we have filter extension and extension. Now what I want to return here, I want it to return true if I'm going to keep this value, and I want it to return false if I'm going to filter out this value from the array that's going to be returned by filter. What that means is I need to return true if extension and filter extension are the same. So the easiest way to do that is just to return extension equals filter extension. That's going to return true if they're the same, false if they are different, which means we will, in filtered files, have a new array containing only the files that were returned by reader that also have the same extension as the extension passed into the script. The only thing left to do here is to log these out. And one thing I'll remind you of is that I can't do it down here. You might want to do it on line 13, but I can't do it there because this being async, that's going to run before I have any of these values. Line 13 is going to run before lines 8, 9, 10. So this filtered files won't exist. Instead, I'm going to come down here under my filter and I will log. Let me double check and see exactly what I'm supposed to log. The list of files should be printed to the console, one file per line. I could do this by looping through, but I don't have to do that, and I think I'll do it a little bit differently. I'm going to log out filtered files. That's an array. I'm going to call the join method on that array. What that will do is that will take all the items in the array and put them together into a single string. The join method takes one argument, and that is a separator. That will be the string that's put between each item in the array for the new string. Since I need to have one per line, I can use a new line character as the separator. That will give me a string with each of the file names in the array joined together by new line characters, so with a new line between each one. I think this should satisfy the requirements. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to test it, and that means we're going to start Node, we're going to pass in our script, and it's expecting two values. It's expecting a path, and it's expecting an extension to filter on. I'm just going to give it this path, which I can represent with a dot, and the extension, which we need to pass in without a dot. I've got one text file in here I used to test another script, so let's try that, see if we can get that back. We have a bug on line 8 of our script, according to this output, cannot read property filter of null. What that means is files on line 8 is null, so it doesn't have a filter method. Let's go back and see what might be causing that. I think I understand the problem now. If you remember from the last video when we first looked at callback functions and the way they're used by Node modules, these methods in Node modules like reader always pass two arguments into the callback. They pass first an error object, and second the data. So what I've done is I've forgotten to take care of the error object, and now I need to surround them with parentheses since I have two parameters I've named. What was happening is Node was passing in null for the error object because there was no error. We were naming that files and trying to run with it as if it were a list of files, when in fact the list of files was the second argument being passed into our callback. What this will do is this will leave error as null, and files will get that second argument, which will be the data, the list of files. Let's try this again and see if that works. That looks like what I would expect. Test.txt. If I do an ls here to list the contents of the directory, I see all these JavaScript files, and then I see this one text file. That is the text file we're filtering on the txt extension. That looks good. The only thing I don't know is I don't know if individual files end up on individual lines, since this particular test only had one file. So let's run a test and filter on the JS extension. That looks good. That looks like what I want. Let's go ahead and use the verifier. We need to give it the file name to verify. It looks like we passed. Here's the expectation. This test apparently sets up a directory to test against, and this is what our script delivered back, so that's good. It's also happy that we used the asynchronous method to read the directory contents. Here's the official solution. It is very similar to our own. They handled adding the dot slightly differently. They didn't use a template string, they just concatenated these two strings together, the dot string plus the argument, which is perfectly fine, works the same. They also handled the error, which I mentioned before that we hadn't done. It's apparently not required on any of these so far because they haven't dinged us for not doing it. Instead of filtering, they have looped through the files array with for each, and they just go ahead and do the test and then log it out directly if it passes the test, which is also perfectly fine. We've just done the additional step of filtering that list first and then logging out the new list. Since they're logging one file name at a time, they don't have to worry about new lines because each call of console.log is automatically put on its own line. Let's take a crack at the next one. Make it modular. Create two files named makeitmodular.js and mymodule.js. This problem is the same as the previous, but introduces the concept of modules. You will need to create two files to solve this. Create a program that prints a list of files in a given directory, filtered by the extension of the files. The first argument is the directory name, and the second argument is the extension filter. Print the list of files to the console. You must use asynchronous I/O. We need a module file, mymodule.js, that does most of the work. It must export a single function that takes three arguments: the directory name, the file name extension string, and our callback function, in that order. Don't alter the file name extension string in any way before passing it to your module. The callback function must be called using the idiomatic node, error as the first argument, data as the second, convention. This convention stipulates that unless there's an error, the first argument passed to the callback will be null and the second will be your data. In this exercise, the data will be your filtered list of files as an array. If you receive an error from your call to fsReadDir, the callback must be called with the error as the first and only argument. We don't print to the console from the module file, only from the original program. In the case of an error bubbling up to your original program file, simply check for it and print an informative message to the console. And this is the contract our module must follow. Export a single function that takes exactly the arguments described. Call the callback exactly once with an error or some data as described. Don't change anything else like global variables or standard out. handle all the errors that may occur, and pass them to the callback. And then they tell us the benefit of having a contract is that our module can be used by anyone who expects this contract. That's sort of the beauty of modular programming, is that anyone can use these as long as they know how they are to be used. This one isn't quite as straightforward as the last one, so I am going to dip into the hints and just see what they offer here. Create a new module by creating a new file that just contains your directory, reading, and filtering function. Let's just head over and do that right now. I'm going to go back into my Explore sidebar, new module, my module.js. Let's make sure that's right. Yeah, that looks good. And then we need makeitmodular.js. To use your new module in your original program file, use the require call the same way that you require fs. The only difference is that for local modules, must be prefixed with /. I'm just going to grab this. You have to have a path if you're going to require a local module. And in fact, I'm pretty sure you can omit the JS. I think it assumes that. Okay, that's a start. We know that most of the work is going to be done here in my module. And we know that this is basically the same script we just wrote. So the first thing I'm going to do is copy and paste all this over here. The way I understand what they want us to do here is this module is going to export a function that is going to take all these arguments. Makeitmodular is going to call the function, and it is the script that's going to be run from the command line. That means we're going to be grabbing these two arguments there in makeitmodular instead of in mymodule.js, since this is the one that will be called from the command line. Let's go back and look at some more hints. I think I skipped over part of this first paragraph about my module. To define a single function export, you assign your function to the module.exports object, overriding what is already there. That means we need this in my module, and everything we do is going to happen inside this function. I'm going to just grab all of this stuff we already have and put it in there. I'm not sure it will stay exactly like that, but we can tweak it as we need to. Let's flip back over to the directions and see what arguments it should be taking again. The first argument is the directory name, and the second argument is the extension filter. Oh, sorry, actually, next paragraph here. 3 arguments: the directory name, the file name extension string, and our callback function, in that order. We need directory. We're going to call this filter extension, and then this will be callback. Now, one thing you might notice is we're still passing directory into readdir. It's no longer defined here in this module because we moved that over here to makeitmodular.js, but we're still okay because we have a parameter for this function we're exporting named directory. So it will be passed into this function, and it can just be passed on through to readdir. So it'll come in here at the top level whenever this module gets used elsewhere, in our case in makeitmodular.js, and then we'll pass it on through to readdir. I'm going to just use the ES6 arrow function syntax here instead of the function declaration, I think is what that's called, or the function expression, maybe. In the same way we have used directory up here, even though it's not defined in this file, it's not pulled out of the arguments in this file, we're also using filter extension down here, and it is also going to be passed in when this function is called. So that one's okay too. The one thing we haven't done is we haven't used the callback, and we need to do that. For this exercise, we're going to use the callback to log out the files. Let's flip back over to the instructions. In this exercise, the data will be your filtered list of files as an array. Remember before in the solution when I pointed out that they hadn't actually captured the filtered files as an array, they just looped through and checked each one and then logged it out? Here's a case where we're going to benefit by capturing that first because this is what we need to return. We already have it, so we don't have to really change anything there. We just need to call the callback. I'm going to return, and I'm going to return a call to the callback. The first argument is going to be the error, and the second argument is supposed to be the array of filtered files. In our case, that is just filtered files. As I'm implementing this callback, I'm noticing something kind of silly I did earlier. I am assigning the return value of this fsreader to directory contents, which is really going to be useless because this is an async method. So everything's going to come back into the callback function. So I don't really need to capture that. I'm just going to delete those. And if I want, I could go back to FilteredLS. Obviously it passed and it works, but we don't really need to assign that to anything. I'm going to go ahead and do that just to keep it clean. Now flip back to the current exercise. Oh, I have misspelled my filtered files array variable name. This should be good for the module. I think this is everything we need here. It's now exporting a function that satisfies the contract we were given. So the next step is just to flip over here to make it modular and use that module. We're using the variable name myModule, and we're requiring that module we created. So myModule is that function that we exported. Let's flip back over. It's expecting a directory, a filter extension, and a callback. I will call it here. I'm going to pass in the directory, which we're getting from the arguments, the filter extension, which we're also getting from the arguments, and now it needs a callback. I know the callback is going to get the error, and then it's going to get the files. And again, what are we doing with those files in this case? Okay, up here, print the list of files one per line to the console. So we're doing the same thing. We're just taking a slightly more circuitous route to get there. I'm going to just do it the same way I did it before because that worked pretty well. We'll say files.join, and I'm going to join it with a new line character. Oh, the thing I have forgotten, that I've forgotten on every other exercise, is error handling. In this one, they specifically ask for it, so I think they're going to test for it. And here is what they want done with it. In the case of an error bubbling up to your original program file, simply check for it and print an informative message to the console. If error, because if there's no error, it will be null. So that will skip this whole if statement. We'll do console.error, and I'm just going to log the error. Console.error in Node works the same as console.log. Let's test this one and see how it works. We can test it almost the same way that we did before, except we'll just need to change the file name. Okay, let's see if that works. That looks good. Let's try it with txt just to make sure the filtering is working. Looks good. All right, I'm going to run it through the verifier. Oh, we did not pass. The output is good. We passed that. Submission results match expected. Additional module file exports a single function. That was good. Additional module file exports a function that takes 3 arguments. That was good. Your additional module file does not appear to pass back an error received from fsReader. Let's go look and see why it wouldn't be doing that. I think what we need to do, if we get to this point, then we should have nothing there, because we should have already tested for error up here, and we should have run our callback and passed error to it. Let's try that through the verifier. Still doesn't seem to like it. Oh, I think it's because we need to return. If we don't return the call of this callback, it will call the callback and then it will continue running the rest of the lines in this function. So we don't want that. We want it to return early if there's an error and just return calling the callback with the error so that nothing else gets called. Let's try that one more time. Still didn't like it. Your additional module file appears to be expecting a dot prefixed extension. It should receive the second command line argument without the added dot. That one I'm not sure about. I'm not sure why it would think that. Oh, okay. Yes, that is true. Our additional module does expect that because we're doing the processing of the filter extension here, which we're not supposed to be doing. Arguments are supposed to be passed directly into my module without any modification. I'm going to copy and paste that line over here, and what I'm going to do, it's no longer a constant, it's just the parameter name. So I'll take that out, and now I'm just going to change this to add the dot to filter extension here inside our function. What this does is it's going to get a filter extension that does not have a dot. Then it's going to reassign the value of filter extension, and it's going to make it just whatever filter extension was, but with a dot in front of it. Now let's flip back over here, and we no longer need any of this processing on this string here in the makeitmodular.js file. Now we're just passing that filter extension through directly. Whatever comes into the application through the command line gets passed directly on to the myModule function. Now this should be a passing test, and it looks like it is. There we go. We got all green check marks. Let's take a look at this official solution. Okay, this first one is their outer file. So this is their makeitmodular.js. They have changed the file names for some reason. Their solution is almost identical to ours, except a few of the variable names have changed. They've logged a little message out if there's an error alongside the error itself. Instead of logging out the array joined with new lines as the separator, they're again looping through that array of the filtered files that came back. Now let's look at the module file. The module file is almost identical as well. A few of the names have changed. The one thing they're doing differently that I can see is instead of where we added the dot to our extension filter at the top of the function, that was actually the first thing we did. They have done it down here in their filter callback, but the result there is going to be exactly the same. We'll stop there this time. If you're working along, just like I said in the last video, try to get a little bit ahead. See if you can do some of those upcoming exercises without any help from me. I'll catch you in the next video where we will pick up where we left off. Okay, let's go with that.